Do it, damn it. Hello? Hey, ho, ha, ho, ha. Damn it, get the fuck on. What's up? What's up? Hello? Oh my god. Oh my god. Not bad for a Sunday. Try to live stream. Hello? Can you hear me? I can hear you. Well, fuck anyways. How are we doing on this Sunday? Cozy Sunday. Sunna's tag? Ah. Klar Zunstag. I'm gonna read the fairy faith in Celtic countries. I don't know. It looks like a big book, but it's only 500 pages. Is that big? I don't know. So the book, what is this? The book leaf? Do you believe in fairies? Not a proper question to put the professors of folklore and mythology. What makes this book unique is not only that it's the most scholarly work on fairies ever published, but also that its author, a distinguished scholar, does not hesitate to admit quite firmly that he recognizes a case for the reality of fairy life. Dr. Evans Wentz is best known for the author-translator of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, but his first love was this book. He was not satisfied with merely formal study, but collected first-hand reports of fairies in Wales, Ireland, Scotland, and Brittany, and faced up to the key questions avoided by other folklorists. What are fairies? Those romantic and sometimes mischievous little people. Pixies, nixies, elves, fauns, brownies, dwarfs, leprechauns, and all the other forms of the Deonai Sidhe. She says, fairy people, are they real? Hey, ho, ha, ha, ha. Damn it. I guess we are getting live streaming. Still with me? Well, anyway. Deonai Sidhe, the fairy people, supposedly. It's spelled D-A-O-I-N-E-S-I-D-H-E. Are they real? Folklorists say that they are fragments of ancient religious beliefs. Occultists call them nature spirits. Peasant tradition says they are fallen angels who were not good enough to be saved, nor bad enough to be lost. Ooh. Let's talk about hit home. There is some truth in all these views. when the wide range of conflicting material could be evaluated. But when all this is sifted, there remains a body of tradition and testimony about an elusive order of life that survives in the natural setting of wild and lonely places. The first and largest section of this book presents the living testimony for fairies collected by Dr. Evans Wentz, classified under individual countries. The second section deals with the recorded traditions of the Celtic literature and mythology. The third, with different theories of fairies and their religious aspects. In the final section, the author advances a rational case for the reality of fairy life. It is no use chasing fairies with the techniques and disciplines of science and scholarship if we lack a sense of wonder and humility of spirit in these matters, and are willing to believe. Dr. Evans Wentz, the first American ever to receive the degree of Doctor of Science in Comparative Religion from Oxford. His journeys led him from the haunts of fairyland to the wilderness of Tibet. Opens a path for us to the luminous reality behind the traditions of folklore. Leslie Shepard has provided a new introduction and biography for Dr. Evan Wentz for this edition. Born in London, he spent years as a documentary film scriptwriter. He has collected British folk songs and written in a folk music revival. He has also lived in India, where he studied yoga, Hindu religion, and music. Dr. Shepard has published record albums and written widely on yoga, Hindu religion, folklore, and physical research. Physical? No, not physical. Psychical. It doesn't say physical, it says psychical research. He is present at work on a book on yoga and editing English translations of treatises on Hindu magic and religion. From the original reviews, the author reviews in succession the various theories by which it is sought to account for the fairy faith in Celtic and other lands. And finally, after examining the evidence, concludes that while all these theories account for some element in the fairy faith, there is a residuum, an X, which nothing can account for except the hypothesis that in, but not of, this material world, immaterial beings really do exist and occasionally manifest themselves in certain places to people who bring a certain psychic equipment to the perception of them. Mr. Wentz adorns the exposition of his theory in many well-known tales capitally told with extracts full of glamour from ancient Celtic texts and with some new stories which he has gleaned from the poets. But his conclusions do not matter. There can be no question that his penchant for mysteries has led him to give us this very charming and valuable book, and one in which the student of folklore and of what may be called folk philosophy will find a mine of information and suggestion from the Times Literary Supplement. Alright, well that's that. That's just the book cover. How long did that take? Alright, well, am I still streaming? Who knows? first printing in June 1966. This book depends chiefly upon the oral and written testimony of freely contributed by its many Celtic authors, the peasant and the scholar, the priest and the scientist, the poet and the businessman, the seer and non-seer, and in honor of them, I dedicate it to two of their brethren in Ireland, A.E., whose unwavering loyalty to the fairy faith has inspired much that I have written, whose friendly guidance in my study of Irish mysticism I most gratefully acknowledge, and William Butler Yeats, who brought to me at my own alma mater in California, first message from fairyland, and who afterwards in his own country led me through the haunts of fairy kings and queens. Oxford, 1911. What a world it must have been. 1911. Those times are long gone. It remains forever true that the proper study of mankind is man, and even early man is not beneath contempt, especially when he proves to have had especially when he proves to have had within him the makings of a great race, and with its highest notions of duty and right, and all else that is noblest in the human soul. The Right Honorable Sir John Rees. So now we're come to the forward. I really need to improve my connection speed. God damn it. Anyway. Still with me? I could just be speaking into nothing. It's alright, we'll do it again if it doesn't work. Do you believe in fairies? This famous question to the audience in Sir J.M. Barrie's play Peter Pan is an opportunity for the children to shout yes to save poor Tinkerbell and renew the fairy faith for another year. It is not considered a proper question to put to professors of folklore and mythology. Ever since the science of folklore became established in the 19th century, the learned scholars have collected and studied fairy tales from country people, particularly from Celtic areas where the fairy faith has always been strong. But the professors were not committed to the same faith as the storytellers, for whom the fairies were real entities, not just interesting relics of folklore. It is one thing to collect stories about fairies, quite another to believe in them. Most folklorists were too worried about their reputations to risk being thought superstitious. What makes the present book unique is not only that it is the most scholarly work on fairies ever published, but also that the author, a distinguished scholar, did not hesitate to face up to the question of belief and admit quite firmly that he recognized a case for the reality of fairy life. What Dr. Evans once was a very unusual and courageous man. He was one of those rare people who combined good academic method with deep awareness of the higher purposes of study. A naturally religious man whose understanding opened a path to the luminous reality behind the traditions of folklore. and the many names and forms of different religions. This fine scholarly background only provided a basic framework, a method, and reference point for a journey into the meaning of life, a journey that took him thousands of miles to strange and dangerous territories with unfamiliar customs. That led to the haunts of fairyland, to the yoga and Buddhism of India and Tibet. He was also a quiet, modest man with no desire for fame, so it is hardly surprising that he does not figure in any standard biographies, although all his books are key works. The following brief sketch of his life is compiled from various sources. Walter Ewing Evans Wentz was born in Trenton, New Jersey, USA, February 2nd, 1978. Later, he came to La Mesa, California, lived there with his family for several years, before leaving the country for his education. He studied at Stanford University, California, where he received his BA in English in 1906, followed by MA in 1907. After that, he traveled to Britain, where he studied social anthropology at Oxford under Sir John Rice, professor of Celtic. Two other famous scholars exercised an important influence. At Stanford, Evan Wentz had attended lectures on psychology given by the great Professor William James, who also encouraged his studies in the fairy faith, although warning him in a kindly way that a young student might find difficulties in putting forward a psychical explanation. James himself had risked criticism by affirming belief in psychical and mystical matters, but his own reputation in the field of psychology and philosophy was already unassailable. The two met again at Oxford when James came there in 1908 to receive a doctorate in science which the university conferred upon him. The other eminent teacher of Evan Wentz was Andrew Lang, famous for his books on folklore and psychical research. He had also published some delightful collections of fairy tales. As it happened, Lang was appointed by the University of Oxford to be one of two examiners of Evan Wentz, and he presented a thesis on the fairy faith. The other examiner was Sir John Rice, principal of Jesus College, Oxford, who was his tutor in Celtic studies. The present book grew out of those studies in conjunction with field work in Wales, Ireland, Scotland, Britain, where he collected first-hand reports of fairies. In its initial form, the work was submitted successively for a doctorate in the University of Leeds in Britain, after which Dr. Evans Wentz made further expeditions in Brittany, Ireland, Wales, the Isle of Man, and Cornwall, developing the work considerably, for which he was awarded a Bachelor BSc at Oxford University in May 1910. At a later date, his own part Celtic ancestry was affirmed in the hyphenated style of his name, which he used for all his other books. Hyphenated style. In its present form, The Fairy Faith in Celtic Countries was first published in 1911, after which As Dr. R. Merritt, once a fellow anthropologist at Oxford, put it, Dr. Evans once became a sort of scholar gypsy who, for the next half a dozen years, might be found ranging anywhere between Oxford and the Nearer East. His research isn't into common traditions of fairy faith, but naturally to more detailed study of pagan and Christian religious beliefs and practices. The background training at Stanford had provided a sympathetic basis for investigations into comparative religion, for amongst the aims set forth by the trustees was the following: it shall be their duty to prohibit sectarian instruction, but to have taught in the university the immortality of the soul, the existence of an all-wise and benevolent Creator, and that obedience to His laws is the highest duty of man. In 1917, he traveled to India, studying the mysticism and religious practices which he believed were once closely connected to in both East and West. He wrote, "I have spent more than 5 years in such research, wandering from the palm-wreathed shores of Ceylon and thence through the wonderland of the Hindus to the glacier-clad heights of the Himalayan ranges, seeking out the wise men of the East. Sometimes I lived among city dwellers, sometimes in jungle and mountain solitudes among yogis, sometimes in monasteries with monks. Sometimes I went on pilgrimages. These travels led throughout India to Tibet. He lived as a Buddhist monk, spent 3 years with Tibetan Lama Kazi Dawa Samdup until the Lama died in 1922. The result of this association was the publication of a group of rare Tibetan religious works based on the Lama's tradition, translations edited by Dr. Evans once. Those works, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, 1927, 49, 57, Tibet's Great Yogis, 1928, Tibetan Yoga and Secret Doctrines, or 7 Books of Wisdom of the Great Path, 1935, 58. Also, the Tibetan Book of the Great Liberation, 1954. These important works are masterpieces of scholarly presentation, but more than that, they also express the insight of a man who understood religious teachings from his own experience and practice, as well as from study. In 1931, Oxford conferred upon Dr. Evans once the degree of Doctor of Science in Comparative Religion, a rare honor since he was then the first American, and one of only 6 other persons to receive this degree. In the following year, San Diego, he attended meetings of the Self-Realization Fellowship under Paramahansa Yogananda, a famous yogi from whom Dr. Evan once had met in India. During those travels, he had encountered various great Indian sages, teachers, who have since become legendary. In Puri, Orissa, he had met Suri Yutkeswar, Ketsvar Giri, a guru of Paramahansa Yogananda, and in 1935 he visited the ashram of the famous Sri Ramana Maharishi at Tiruvannamalai. Tiruvannamalai. Did you get that? South India. His conversations with this realized sage were included in the published talks with Sri Ramana Maharishi, first published by the ashram in 1955. Dr. Evans once also maintained close contact with Buddhist organizations, such as the Mahabodhi Society. He was welcome in many different religious groups, recognizing the contribution all could make in uniting East and West with mutual understanding and religious insight. Towards the end of his life, he retired to San Diego, where he spent 23 years in all. He was naturally drawn closer to the Self-Realization Fellowship, who had a colony at Encinitas, California, in 1946. Good year. He had written a warm tribute to Paramahansa Yogananda as a foreword to the latter's autobiography of a yogi. During the last year of his life, Dr. Evans once worked with a secretary from the SRF, living quietly and unobtrusively while writing in his last book, Sacred Mountains of the World, calling sometimes for research information at the San Diego State Library, only 2 blocks away. The manuscript had been completed when he died in his 88th year, July 17, 1965. In his will, he made generous bequests to assist religious activities. He left $3,000 in cash and other property in India to the Mahabodhi Society as an endowment fund to establish a Buddhist educational or religious center in the Kasardivi village of India. He left over 2,000 acres of land near Tecate to the state of California to be used as an experimental reforestation and recreational area, and as a game refuge. This estate included Kuchkama, a mountain sacred to the American Indians. Dr. Evans once intended this mountain to symbolize goodwill and fraternity between the races and faiths of the East and West, and granted permission for cultural and religious organizations to erect a shrine in Kuchkama. Other property was willed to the Boy Scouts and the YMCA in San Diego. Dr. Evans once left mineral rights to all his property, some 5,000 acres, to Stanford, proceeds to be used to establish a professorship in Oriental philosophy, religion, and ethics. Some of his Oriental manuscripts were left to the Bodleian Library at Oxford University, others to Stanford. Dr. Evans once was cremated July 21st, 1965, and the funeral service included a reading in English from his own edition of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, invoking the perfect enlightenment of pure reality. It was the end of a long pilgrimage. The Fairy Faith in Celtic Country was his first book. But already there were clear indications of a keen and sympathetic mind that would not be satisfied with merely formal study. He faced up to the key questions avoided by other folklorists. What are fairies? Those romantic and sometimes mischievous little people. Pixies, nixies, elves, fauns, brownies, dwarfs, leprechauns, and all the other forms of... There's that word again. Deone Sidhe, with parentheses around fairy people. Are they real? Folklorists say that they were fragments of ancient religious beliefs. Occultists thought they were nature spirits. Peasant traditions said they were fallen angels who were not good enough to be saved, nor bad enough to be lost. There is some truth in all these views. We have to disentangle a wide range of conflicting material, the animism of primitive races, the symbolism and exaggeration of folk religious memory, the classical references of Horace, Ovid, and Homer, the sophisticated literary fairies of Shakespeare, and the Countess of Aulnoy, and the household tales of folk heroes like Jack the Giant Killer, transplanted from early Indo-European tradition. When all this is sifted and evaluated, there remains a body of tradition and testimony, even into modern times, of an elusive, ghostly order of life on the borderland of mind and matter, and usually surviving in the natural setting of wild and lonely places, rather than the skeptical bustle of towns and cities. These fairies are more often reported in Celtic countries, where the traditions are richer. Although I once heard the same fairy tale in a version from Crete that T. Crofton Croker described as from Knockgrafton, Ireland. The faith that is needed to see fairies is not easily acquired. It is part of an ancient tradition and a way of life alien to modern urban man. Dr. Evans once dedicated this book to two famous Irish Celts, the poet and mystic George W. Russell. Come on, you. Download something, would ya? Sorry. George W. Russell, the mystic, who wrote The Candle of Vision under the name A.E., which this book was dedicated to, and the poet W.B. Yeats, who edited that wonderful anthology, Fairy and Folk Tales of the Irish Peasantry, 1889. It may have been Yeats' book that excited the interest of Dr. Evans once, in the first place. While it seems to me that A.E. is very likely the anonymous Irish seer that Dr. Evans once mentions in his own book. His book is excellently arranged in 4 main sections. The first section is a very substantial one, presenting the living testimony for fairies as collected by Dr. Evans once. Here the materials are classified under individual countries, headed by short introductions from recognized authorities like Dr. Douglas Hyde, Professor Anatole Lebratz, and Sir John Rice. Dr. Alexander Carmichael also. The second section of the book deals with the recorded traditions of Celtic literature and mythology. In the third section, Dr. Evans Wentz examines different theories of fairies and discusses the religious aspects. In this final section, he puts forward a rational case for the reality of fairy life. Some of the on-the-spot investigations by Dr. Evans Wentz were of usual interest. In Scotland, he visited the district of Aberfoyle, where over 2 centuries earlier, a local minister, the Reverend Robert Kirk, had investigated the fairies of the district much as a visiting anthropologist studying a primitive tribe. Kirk's little book, The Secret Commonwealth of Elves, Fauns, and Fairies, dates from 1691. Wow. Get that book, would you? His tomb is in Aberfoyle. But legend has it that he does not truly lie there. According to his successor, the Reverend Dr. Graham, he swooned away while crossing a fairy hill, and after apparent death and burial appeared in a dream to a relative, stating that he was a prisoner in fairyland. He gave instructions for his release, but his cousin was too frightened to carry them out. So Mr. Kirk was lost forever. Dr. Evans Wentz reviews the various theories usually put forward to explain away the fairy faith. That fairies are a folk recollection of an ancient pygmy race. That they are mythological personifications of natural phenomena or remnants of ancient religious beliefs. In the past part of his book, he correlates fairy life with the ghosts and spirits of psychical phenomena, quoting the French researcher M. Camille Flammarion, who made a similar suggestion in his book Mysterious Psychic Forces, 1907. Either it is we who produce these phenomena, or it is spirits, but mark this well. These spirits are not necessarily the souls of the dead, for other kinds of spiritual beings may exist, and space may be full of them without our ever knowing anything about it, except under unusual circumstances. Do we not find in the different ancient literatures demons, angels, gnomes, goblins, sprites, specters, elementals? Perhaps these legends are not without some foundation in fact. The conclusion of Dr. Evans Wentz is that we can postulate scientifically on the showing of the data of psychical research the existence of such invisible intelligences as gods, Genji. How the fuck do you say that? Geni? Genii. I don't know. Diamonds. Daimons, all kinds of true fairies and disembodied men. It took courage for a scholar to publish such views. Folklorists were alarmed at what seemed a concession to superstition and imagination, although they could not fault the author's sensible and careful scientific method. At least one lover of fairy lore was offended that fairies should be connected with ignorant and senseless spooks who agitate tables or otherwise behave in aimless manner of idiots. In contrast, W.B. Yeats, 20 years earlier, had found a country skeptic who didn't believe in ghosts, although he had no doubts about the gentry, as they called fairies in Ireland. "Ghosts," said he. "There are no such things at all. At all. But the gentry, they stand to reason. For the devil, when he fell out of heaven, took the weak-minded ones with him, and they were put in the waste places. And that's what the gentry are. But they are getting scarce now, because their time's over. You see, and they're going back. But ghosts? No! Certainly not. That was before 1889, but fairies, although scarce, have been reported frequently ever since, as the wonderful stories in this book demonstrate. And those who disparage such accounts as the illusions of simple-minded peasants should reflect that much testimony is from highly intelligent, educated persons. Long after the first publication of Dr. Evans Wentz, his book, people have continued to see fairies. In fact, they even claim to have photographed them. In 1920, the late Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, creator of Sherlock Holmes and also a sincere spiritualist, first published an account of what he claimed were real fairies photographed by two little girls in Yorkshire. His full-length book, The Coming of the Fairies, 1922, gave a fuller account, and it should be said that in spite of many attacks, the evidence has never been conclusively discounted. In fact, it has been rather strengthened by other writers. Geoffrey Hudson, Fairies at Work and Play, 1925, and E.L. Gardner, Fairies, the Cottingley Photographs, and their sequel. An Irish friend once told me that he'd seen fairies on the hill of Howth at early morning. Little men about 3 feet high, riding on donkeys to scale. It seems that fairies are basically impersonal spirits that can take on different forms in relation to the convention of the viewer. This protean aspect would explain the variable size of fairies, where they are sometimes seen in rather stylized period costumes, and also their metamorphosis in the realm of psychical phenomena. I have a strong suspicion that in the newer mythology of flying saucers, some of those shining visitors in spacecraft from other worlds might turn out to be just another form of fairies. Many people still have the fairy faith, but do not wish to invite ridicule by talking about it. Only a few years ago, a radio Eirean, E-I-R-E-A-N-N, reporter of my acquaintance interviews a woman in the west of Ireland who had been infested with fairies for several weeks after cutting down a fairy thorn bush. And I once recorded a delightful story from an Irish lad about a man in County Wicklow who was riding his bicycle. His bicycle home one evening when he was lifted up by the fairies and deposited in a tree with his bicycle between his legs. Another friend of mine has heard the banshee, that weird spine-chilling fairy wail that heralds a death in the family. I have never seen a fairy myself, but I'm always glad to hear about them. As Dr. Evans once shrewdly observed, there are many things one has never seen, but which no sensible person would wish to deny existence. And it would be a mistake to imagine that all the tales are from Ireland or in other Celtic countries. There is a fairy investigation society in Britain, and their 1963 newsletter, they reported some fascinating fairy viewings in Buckinghamshire. It is easy to ridicule the subject, but as with the world of psychical phenomena, there is a formidable and consistent body of evidence accumulated over many years. I see nothing extravagant in the conclusions of Dr. Evans once in linking together religion, ghosts, and fairies. Civilized man has cut himself off from the age-old metaphysical significance of the journey of the sun and the movement of the seasons in the mysterious green world of nature. Insulated in cities by bricks and concrete, pampered by science, and confused by the impatient and intricate demands of the practical world, he has become separated from that great stream of bright legend and myth that is the mystery and art of folk cultures. His mystical vision has atrophied. The literature of cities is a fragmented, materialistic chaos, a mixture of truths, half-truths, imagination, and dimly recalled symbols as seen through a distorting glass, lacking the clear, inspired meaning that shone from the folk and fairy tales and the earlier religions. Man became lost in the labyrinths created by his own practical skills. Religion, a bureaucracy, and fairies an old wives' tale. If uneasy spirits disturbed modern men, they were more often the less articulate raps and fragmentary communications of formless spirits or the dead wandering in uncharted limbo. Only in the remains of folk cultures can we find that luminous stream of tradition that connects man with his ancient origins. We can be grateful to the late Dr. Evans once for his fine scholarly book, but most of all for his basic attitude and sympathetic reporting. It is no use chasing fairies with the techniques and disciplines of science and scholarship if we lack a sense of wonder and humility of spirit in these matters. Fairy tales certainly throw light on the origins and beliefs of our long past ancestors, but far more important, they communicate a mood and an atmosphere concerned with intuition. The fairy faith opens the door to religious awareness. Stories of fairies embody all that is romantic, wistful, and melancholy, the sudden fear and aching longing for lost worlds, strange countries, dreams of beauty beyond the mundane imperfections of here and now. There is the feeling in Keats' wonderful lines about magic casements opening on the foam of perilous seas in fairylands forlorn. There is some of this feeling, too, in that strange story reported by Lady Archibald Campbell in 1907, when she spoke with an old blind man and his wife living in an Irish glen, who claimed to have caught a fairy and kept it captive for 2 weeks. A little red-capped fellow, not 2 feet high, his hair reddish, his skin very clear but dark in color. The little red cap fit neatly upon his head. His dress was green, soft to the touch, shorter than a kilt. His boots were soft as moss over his naked legs. It was a leprechaun, the fairy that might bring luck to a poor man, for he knows where the crocks of gold are hidden. I gripped him close in my arms and took him home. I called to the woman, his wife, to look at what I had got. "What doll is it you have there?" she cried. "A living one," I said, and put it on the dresser. We feared to lose it. We kept the door locked. It talked and muttered to itself queer words. It might have been near on a fortnight since we had the fairy, when I said to the woman, "Sure, if we show it in the great city, we will be made up, i.e. become rich." So we put it in a cage. At night, we would leave the cage door open, and we would hear it stirring through the house. We fed it on bread and rice and milk out of a cup at the end of a spoon. But finally, it had got away, and they had bad luck ever since. The old man said sadly, "For me, though I've lost my sight, the day I took the leprechaun, I thought no harm, only that we would be made up. I am thinking different now, that by the way things have gone. Sure, we are among them in God's world who were born to be poor." There's also a sad enchantment in those lines by that great Irish mystic and poet, W.B. Yeats, who fused together ghosts, fairies, and magic. "Come away, O human child, to the waters and the wild, with a fairy hand in hand, for the world's more full of weeping than you can understand." In the magic private world of the child and the vision of the mystic, there are more enduring truths than the chapter and verse of the skeptic or the flashy ephemeral gains and losses of the material world. The fairy faith is inseparably connected with that same era of human consciousness. It has to do with religious experience, with metaphysical insight. It is concerned with a greater reality beyond the everyday world of human frailty and limitations. It was that great unknown which Dr. Evan Wentz explored boldly and sympathetically, traveling from the Celtic world of fairies to the far-off territories and religious traditions of India and Tibet. This is a great book, equally important to scholar and mystic. London, England, April 1966, by Leslie Shepard. Grateful thanks are due to Miss Gertrude Moackley, New York, and Mr. Arthur Osborne of Sri Ramanaswaram, Tiruvannamalai, South India, and the librarian and staff of San Diego Public Library, California, for research material on the late Dr. Evans Wentz. Oof, there it is. That's the foreword. So now we come to the contents. You want to hear the contents real quick? We got the premise and introduction. We got section 1, the living fairy faith, which has the environment, the taking of evidence. In chapter 3, an anthropological examination of the evidence. Section 2, the recorded fairy faith. Chapter 4, the people of the goddess Diana, or the Sidhe. The goddess Dana, or the Sidhe. Chapter 5, the Brythonic divinities and the Brythonic fairy faith. Chapter 6, the Celtic otherworld. Chapter 7, the Celtic doctrine of rebirth. Section 3, the cult of gods, spirits, fairies, and the dead. Chapter 8, testimony of archaeology. Chapter 9, the testimony of paganism. Chapter 10, the testimony of Christianity. Section 4, modern science and the fairy faith, and conclusions. Chapter 11, science and the fairies. Chapter 12, the Celtic doctrine of rebirth and otherworld, scientifically re-examined. How long has it been? About an hour? So there you go. Shall I read the introduction? Suppose so. Doesn't seem like it's too much more pages. Maybe not. Oh hell, why not? I'm gonna do the preface and introduction, and then that about does it for me. During the years 1907 and 9, this study first took shape, being then based mainly on literary sources, and during the latter year it was successfully presented to the faculty of letters of the University of Reims, Brittany, for the degree of Docteur de Lettres. Murdered that. Since then I have re-investigated the whole problem of the Celtic belief in fairies. I have collected very much fresh material. 2 years ago, the scope of my original research was limited to the 4 chief Celtic countries, but now it includes all of the Celtic countries. In the present study, which has profited greatly by criticisms of the first pass by scholars in Britain and in France, the original literary point of view is combined with the broader point of view of anthropology. This study, the final and more comprehensive form of my views about the fairy faith, would never have been possible had I not enjoyed during many months the kindly service and constant encouragement of Mr. R. Merritt, reader in social anthropology in the University of Oxford, and fellow of Exeter College. During May 1910, the substance of this essay was in its pan-Celtic form was submitted to the Board of Faculty of Natural Science of Oxford University for the research degree of Bachelor of Science, which was duly granted. But the present work contains considerable material not contained in the essay presented to the Oxford examiners, the Right Honourable Sir John Rice and Mr. Andrew Lang, and therefore I alone assume entire responsibility for all its possible shortcomings, and in particular for some of its more speculative theories, which to some minds may appear to be in conflict with orthodox views, whether of the theologian or of the man of science. These theories, however venturesome they may appear, are put forth in almost every case with the full approval of some reliable scholarly Celt, and as such they are chiefly intended to make the exposition of the belief in fairies as completely and as truly Celtic as possible, without much regard for non-Celtic opinion, whether this be in harmony with Celtic opinion or not. As the new manuscript of the Fairy Faith lies before me, revised and finished, I realize even more fully than I did 2 years ago, with respect to the original study, how little right I have to call it mine. Those to whom the credit for it really belongs are the many kind friends and helpers in Ireland, Scotland, Isle of Man, Wales, Cornwall, and Brittany, and many others who are not celts, the 3 great nations, happily so intimately united now by unbreakable bonds of goodwill and international brotherhood in Britain, France, and the United States of America. For without the aid of all these Celtic and non-Celtic friends, the work could never have been accomplished. They have given me their best and rarest thoughts, as so many golden threads. I have only furnished the mental loom, and woven these golden threads together in my own way, according to what I take to be the psychological pattern of fairy faith. I am under a special obligation to the following 6 distinguished Celtic scholars who have contributed for my 2nd chapter, the 6 introductions to the fairy lore, collected by me in their respective countries, which would be Dr. Douglas Hyde of Ireland, Dr. Alexander Carmichael, Scotland, Miss Sophia Morrison, Isle of Man, the Right Honourable Sir John Rice of Wales, Mr. Henry Jenner, Cornwall, Professor Anatole Lebratz in Brittany. I am also greatly indebted to the Reverend Ye Estlin Carpenter, Principal of Manchester College, for having aided me with the parts of this book touching Christian theology. To Mr. R.I. Best, M.R.I.A., Assistant Librarian, National Library in Dublin, for having aided me with the parts devotedly to the study of modern Irish and of Arthurian romance and mythology, and has guided me both during the year 1907-08 and ever since in Celtic folklore generally. To Mr. Andrew Lang, I am likewise a debtor, for especially in view of the important suggestions which he has given me during the past 2 years with respect to anthropology and to psychical research. In my relation to the Faculty of Letters of the University of Reims, I shall always remember the friendly individual assistance offered to me there during the year 1908-09 by Professor John Loth, then Dean in that university, but now of the College of France in Paris, particularly with respect to Brythonic mythology, philology, and archaeology, by Professor Georges Doughton, particularly with respect to Gaelic matters, and by Professor Anatole Lebras, whose continual good wishes towards my work have been a constant source of inspiration since our first meeting, March in 1908, especially in my investigation of La Legende de la Mort and of the related traditions and living folk beliefs in Brittany. Brittany, with its haunted ground of Karnak, home of the ancient Brythonic mysteries. WYEW, Jesus College, Oxford, All Saints' Day, 1911. There, neither turmoil nor silence. Through fair, the sight of Aaron's plains, hardly will they seem so after you have known the great plain. The wonder of a land, the land of which I speak, no youth there grows to old age. We behold and are not beheld the god Mindir in Tokmark Etenya. There's the preface. Here's one of the introduction. I have told what I have seen, what I have thought, and what I have learned by inquiry. Herodotus. One, the religious nature of the fairy faith. There probably is no other place in Celtic lands more congenial or more inspiring for the writing down of one's deeper intuitions about the fairy faith than Karnak. Under the shadow of the pagan tumulus and mount of the sacred fire now dedicated by triumphant Christianity to the Archangel Michael. The very name of Karnak is significant, and in two continents, Africa and Europe, to follow the certain evidence of archaeology alone, there seem to have been no greater centers for ancient religion than Karnak in Egypt and Karnak in Brittany. On the banks of the Nile, the children of Isis and Osiris erected temples as perfect as human art can make them, on the shores of the Morbihan, the mighty men who were, as it seems, the teachers of our own Celtic forefathers, erected temples of unhewn stone. The wonderful temples in Yucatan, the temple caves in prehistoric India, the Stonehenge in England, the Parthenon, the Acropolis, St. Peter's at Rome, Westminster's Abbey, or Notre Dame, and the pyramids and the temples of Egypt equally with the alignments of Karnak. Each in their own way record more or less a perfectly man's attempt to express materially what he feels spiritually. Perfected art can beautify and make more attractive to the eye and mind, but it cannot enhance in any degree the innate spiritual ideals which men in all ages have held. And thus it is that we read amid the rough stone menhirs and dolmens in Brittany as amid the polished granite monoliths and magnificent temples in Egypt, the same silent message from the past to the present, from the dead to the living. This message, we think, is fundamentally important in understanding the Celtic fairy faith. For, in our opinion, the belief in fairies has the same origin as all religions and mythologies. And there seems never to have been an uncivilized tribe or race or nation of civilized men who have not had some form of belief in an unseen world, peopled by unseen things. In religions, mythologies, and the fairy faith too, we behold these attempts which have been made by different peoples in different ages to explain in terms of human experience this unseen world, its inhabitants, its laws, and man's relations to it. The ancients called its inhabitants gods, genii, demons, shades. Christianity knows them as angels, saints, demons, and souls of the dead. To uncivilized tribes, they are gods, demons, spirits of ancestors, and the Celts think of them as gods and as fairies of many kinds. 2. The interpretation of the fairy faith. By the fairy faith, we mean that specialized form of belief in spiritual realm inhabited by spiritual beings, which had existed from prehistoric times until now in Ireland, Scotland, Isle of Man, Cornwall, Wales, Britain, or other parts of the ancient empire of the Celts. In studying this belief, we are concerned directly with living Celtic folk traditions and with past Celtic folk traditions as recorded in literature. And if fairies actually exist as invisible beings or intelligences, and our investigations lead us to the tentative hypothesis that they do, they are natural and not supernatural, for nothing which exists can be supernatural. And, therefore, it is our duty to examine the Celtic fairy races, just as we examine any fact in the visible realm wherein we now live, whether it be a fact of chemistry, or physics, or of biology. However, as we proceed to make such an examination, we shall have to remember constantly that there is a new set of ideals to work with, entirely different from what we find in natural sciences, and often no adequate vocabulary based on common human experiences. An American who has traveled in Asia, and an Englishman who has traveled in Australia, may meet in Paris and exchange traveling experiences with mutual understanding, because both of them have experienced travel, and they will have an adequate vocabulary to describe each experience. Because most men have also experienced travel, but a saint who has known the spiritual condition called ecstasy cannot explain ecstasy to a man who has never known it. And if he should try to do so, would discover at once that no modern language is suitable for the purpose. His experience is rare and not universal, and men have developed no complete vocabulary to describe experiences not common to the majority of mankind. And this is especially true of psychical experiences. It's the same in dealing with fairies, as these are hypothetically conceived for only a few men and women can assert that they have seen fairies, and hence there are no adequate vocabulary to describe fairies. Among the ancients, who dealt so largely with psychical sciences, there seems to have been a common language which could be used to explain the invisible world and its inhabitants. But we of this age have not yet developed such a language. Consequently, men who deny human immortality, as well as men with religious faith, who have not, through personal psychical experiences, transformed that faith into fact, nowadays, when they happen to read what Plato, Iamblichus, or any of the Neoplatonists have written, or even what modernists have written in attempting to explain psychic facts, call it mysticism. And to the great majority of Europeans and Americans, mysticism is a most convenient noun, applicable to anything which may seem reasonable, yet wholly untranslatable in terms of their own individual experience. And mysticism usually means something quite the reverse of scientific, simply because we have, by usage, unwisely limited the meaning of the word science to a knowledge of things material and visible, whereas it really means a knowing or a knowledge of everything that exists. We have tried to deal with the rare psychical experiences of Irish, Scotch, Manx, Welsh, or Breton seers and psychics generally in the clearest language possible, but if now and then we are charged with being mystical, this is our defense. Number 3. The method of studying the fairy faith. In the study, which is first of all a folklore study, we pursue principally an anthropopsychological method of interpreting the Celtic belief in fairies, though we do not hesitate now and then to call in the aid of philology, and we make good use of the evidence offered by mythologies, religions, metaphysics, and the physical sciences. Folklore, a century ago, was considered beneath the serious consideration of scholars. But there has come about a complete reversal of scholarly opinion, for now it is seen that the beliefs of the people, their legends, and their songs are the source of nearly all literatures, and that their institutions and customs are the origin of those modern times. And today, the new science of folklore, which, as Mr. Andrew Lang says, must be taken to include psychical research or psychical sciences, archaeology, anthropology, and a comparative mythology and religion, are indispensable. Thus, folklore offers the scientific means of studying man in the sense meant by the poet, who declared that the proper study of mankind is man. Number 4, divisions of the study. This study is divided into 4 sections or parts. The first one deals with the living fairy faith among the Celts themselves. The second, with the recorded and ancient fairy faith, as we find it in Celtic literature and mythology. The third, with the fairy faith in its religious aspects. And the fourth section, an attempt has been made to suggest how the theories of our newest science, psychical research, explain the belief in fairies. I have set forth in the first section in detail and as clearly as possible the testimony communicated to me by living Celts who either believe in fairies or all say that they have seen fairies. And throughout other sections, I have preferred to draw as much as possible the material from men and women rather than from books. Books too often are written out of other books, and too seldom from the life of man. And in a scientific study of the fairy faith, such as we have undertaken, the Celt himself is by far the best. In fact, the only authority. For us, it is much less important to know what scholars think of fairies than to know what the Celtic people think of fairies. This is especially true in considering the fairy faith as it exists now. Five, the collecting of material. In June 1908, after a year's preparatory work on things Celtic, under the direction of the Oxford professor, oh man, it was an hour. Oh, how you feeling out there? Am I doing all right? Reading tough work. I think I have to take my shirt off. I think I got a fairy that's warming me up. Oh, there ain't none in America, is there? Can we take a boat ride? What do you think of that? We're still in the introduction there, folks. I don't know. I think I got a lot of dead space going on, but reading is tough work. Well, here we go. Let me get a drink. Don't have a drink. Anyway. So, we are at number 5 in the introduction, the collecting of material. In June 1908, after a year of preparatory work in things Celtic under the direction of Oxford professor of Celtic Sir John Rice, I began to travel in Wales, Ireland, Scotland, and Brittany, and to collect material there at first hand from the people who have shaped and who will keep alive the fairy faith. And during the year 1909 to 10, fresh folklore expeditions were made into Brittany, Ireland, Wales, and then finally the study of the fairy faith was made pan-Celtic by similar expeditions throughout the Isle of Man and into Cornwall. Many of the most remote parts of these lands were visited, and often there was no other plan to adopt or any method better or more natural than to walk day after day from one straw thatched cottage to another, living on the simple, wholesome food of the peasants. Sometimes there was the picturesque mountain road to climb. Sometimes the route lay through marshy peatlands or across a rolling grass-covered country. And with each change of landscape came some new thought and some new impression of the Celtic life, or perhaps some new description of fairy. This immersion is the most striking natural and social environment of the Celtic race. It gave me an insight into the mind, the religion, the mysticism, and the very heart of the Celt himself, such as no mere study in libraries could ever do. I tried to see the world as he does. I participated in his innermost thoughts about the great problem of life and death, with which he of all peoples is most deeply concerned. And thus he revealed to me the source of his highest ideals and aspirations. I daily felt the deep and innate seriousness of his ancestral nature, and living as he lives. I tried in all ways to be like him. I was particularly qualified for such an undertaking, partly Celtic myself by blood, and perhaps largely so by temperament. I found it easy to sympathize with the Celt and with his environments. Further, being by birth an American, I was in many places privileged to enter where an Englishman or a non-Celt of Europe would not be. In my education under the free ideals of a New World democracy always made it possible for me to view economic, political, religious, and racial questions in the Celt lands apart from a European point of view, and without the European prejudices which are so numerous and so greatly to be regretted. Without any doubt, during my sojourn, extending over 3 years among the Celts, these various environments shaped my thoughts about fairies and fairyland, as they ought to have done if truth is ever to be reached by research. These experiences of mine led me to believe that the natural aspects of the Celtic countries, much more than those of the most non-Celtic countries, impress man and awaken in him some familiar part of himself. Call it the subconscious self, the subliminal self, the ego, or what you will, which gives him an unusual power to know and to feel invisible or psychical influences. What is there, for example, in London or Paris or Berlin or New York to awaken the intuitive power of man, that subconsciousness deep hidden in him, equal to the solitude of those magical environments of nature which the Celts enjoy and love? In my travels, when the weather was too wild to venture out day by day, or when the favorable hours of the night had arrived, with fires and candles lit, even during a roadside chat amid the day's journey, there was gathered together little by little from one country and another the mass of testimony which chapter 2 contains. And with all this, my opinions began to take shape. But when I set out from Oxford in June, I had no certain or clear ideas as to what fairies are, nor why there should be any belief in them. In less than a year afterwards, I found myself committed to the psychological theory, which I am herein setting forth. 6. Theories of the fairy faith. We make continual reference throughout our study to this psychological theory of nature and origin of the Celtic fairy faith, and it is one of our purposes to demonstrate that this is the root theory, which includes or absorbs the four theories already advanced to account for the belief in fairies. To guide the reader to his own conclusions, we shall here briefly outline these four theories. The first of them may be called the naturalistic theory, which is that in ancient and in modern times, man's beliefs in gods, spirits, or fairies have been the direct result of his attempts to explain or rationalize natural phenomena. Of this theory, we accept as true that the belief in fairies, often anthropomorphically, reflects the natural environment as well as the social condition moving through the air at night. The naturalistic theory shows accurately enough that natural phenomena and environment have given direction to the anthropomorphizing of God, spirit, or fairies. But after explaining the eternal aspect of the fairy faith, it cannot logically go any further. Or, if logically it does attempt to explain the belief in gods, spirits, or fairies as due entirely to material causes, it becomes, in our opinion, like the psychology of 50 years ago, obsolete. For now, the new psychology and psychical research has been forced to admit, if only as a working hypothesis, the possibility of invisible intelligences or entities able to influence man and nature. We seem to be approaching a scientific proof of the doctrines of such ancient philosophical scientists as Pythagoras and Plato, that all external nature, animated throughout and controlled in its phenomena by daemons, acting by the will of the gods, is to men nothing more than the visible effects of an unseen world of causes. In the internal aspects of the fairy faith, the fundamental fact seems clearly to be that there must have been in the minds of prehistoric men, as there is now in the minds of modern men, a germ idea of a fairy for environment to enact upon and shape. Without an object to act upon, environment can accomplish nothing. This is evident. The naturalistic theory examines only the environment and its effects, and forgets altogether the germ idea of a fairy to be acted upon. But the psychological theory remembers and attempts to explain the germ idea of a fairy and the effect of nature upon it. The second theory may be called the pygmy theory, which Mr. David McRitchie, who has definitely committed to it, has so clearly set forth in his well-known work entitled The Testimony of Tradition. This theory is that the whole fairy belief has grown up out of a folk memory of an actual pygmy race. This race is supposed to have been a very early prehistoric, probably Mongolian race, which inhabited the British Islands and many parts of continental Europe. When the Celt nations appeared, these pygmies were driven into mountain fastnesses and into the most inaccessible places, where a few of them may have survived until comparatively historical times. over against the champions of the pygmy theory may beset two of its opponents. Dr. Bertram C.A. Windle and Mr. Andrew Lang. Dr. Windle, in his introduction to Tyson's philological essay concerning the pygmies of the ancients, makes these 6 most destructive criticisms or points against the theory. So far as our present knowledge teaches us, there never was a really pygmy race inhabiting the northern parts of Scotland. The mounds with which the tales of the little people are associated have not, in many cases, have been habitations, but were natural or sepulchral in their nature. Three. Well, that was the second. Here's the third criticism. Little people are not by any means associated entirely with mounds. Fourth criticism. The association of giants and dwarfs in the traditions confuses the theory. Number 5. There are fairies where no pygmies ever were, as, for example, in North America. Oh, really? Number 6. Even Eskimos and Lapps have fairy beliefs and could not have been the original fairies of more modern fairy lore. Together, as we think our study will show, the evidence of the fairy faith itself gives only a slender and superficial support to the pygmy theory. We maintain that the theory, so far as it is provable, and this is evidently not very far, is only one strand, contributed by ethnology and social psychology, in the complex fabric of the fairy faith, and is as such woven around a psychical central pattern, the fundamental pattern of the fairy faith. Therefore, from our point of view, the pygmy theory is altogether inadequate, because it overlooks or misinterprets the most essential and prominent elements in the belief in which the Celtic peoples hold concerning fairies and fairyland. The Druid theory, to account for fairies, is less widespread. It is that the folk memory of the Druids and their magical practices is alone responsible for the fairy faith. The first suggestion of this theory seems to have been made by the Reverend Dr. Kikiri in his Scottish Scenery, published in 1803. 3 years later, the Reverend Dr. Graham published an identical hypothesis in his sketches descriptive of picturesque scenery on the southern confines of Perthshire. Mr. Ritchie suggests, with all his reason, that 2 writers probably had discussed together the theory and hence put it forth. Dr. Alfred Murray, in La Fils du Moyen Age, published in 1843 at Paris, appears to have made liberal use of Patrick Graham's suggestions in propounding his theory that the fees, or fairy women, in the Middle Ages are due to a folk memory of druidesses. Murray seems to have forgotten that throughout pagan Britain and Ireland, both much more important for the study of fairies than Celtic Europe during the Middle Ages, Druids rather than Druidesses had the chief influence on the people, and that yet, despite this fact, Irish and Welsh mythology is full of stories about fairy women coming from the other world. Nor is there any proof, or even good ground for argument, that the Irish fairy women are a folk memory of Druidesses, for if there ever were Druidesses in Ireland, they played a subordinate and very insignificant role. As in the case of the pygmy theory, we maintain that the Druid theory also is inadequate. It discovers a real anthropomorphic influence at work on the outward aspects of fairy faith, analogically makes that to be the origin of the fairy faith. The fourth theory, the mythological theory, is of very great importance. It is that fairies are the diminished figures of the old pagan divinities of the early Celts, and many modern authorities on Celtic mythology and folklore hold it. To us, the theory is acceptable so far as it goes, but it is not adequate in itself, nor is it the root theory, because a belief in gods and goddesses must in turn be explained. And in making this explanation, we arrive at the psychological theory, which this study, perhaps the first one of its kind, attempts to set forth. I think this is the last section of the introduction. No. Maybe I'll save that for next time. I'm getting tired. Dang no, hour and a half. Should I do it? Oh, fucking hungry. Should have. We got some needs before I do this. Man, I'm tired. Quit your fucking belly aching. Get through it. Alright. Here we go. 7. The importance of studying the fairy faith. I have made a very careful personal investigation of surviving Celtic fairy faith by living for many months with and among the people who preserve it. I have compared fairy phenomena and the phenomena said to have been caused by gods, Ginni, demons, or spirits of different kinds, and recorded in the writings of ancient, medieval, and modern metaphysical philosophers, Christian and pagan, saints, mystics, seers, and now more or less clearly substantiated from 30 to 40 years of experimentation in psychical sciences by eminent scientists of our own time, such as Sir William Crookes and Sir William Oliver Lodge in England, and M. Camille Flammarion in France. As a result, I am convinced of the very great value of a serious study of the fairy faith. The fairy faith as the folk religion of the Celts ought, like all religions, to be studied sympathetically as well as scientifically. To those who take a materialistic view of life, and consequently deny the existence of spirits or invisible intelligences such as fairies, are said to be, we should say, as my honored American teacher in psychology, the late Dr. William James of Harvard, used to say in his lecture at Stanford. Materialism, considered as a system of philosophy, never tries to explain the why of things. But in our study of the fairy faith, we shall attempt to deal with this why of things. And then perhaps the value of studying fairies and fairyland will be more apparent even to materialists. The great majority of men in cities are apt to pride themselves on their own exemption from superstition and smile pityingly at the poor countrymen and countrywomen who believe in fairies. But when they do so, they forget that with all their own admirable progress in material invention, with all the far-reaching data of their acquired science, with all the vast extent of their commercial and economic conquests, they themselves have ceased to be natural. Wherever, under modern conditions, a great multitude of men and women are herded together, there is bound to be an unhealthy psychical atmosphere. I've never found in the country an atmosphere which inevitably tends to develop in the average man who is not psychically strong enough to resist it, lower at the expense of higher forces or qualities, and thus to inhibit any normal attempts to the subliminal self, a well-accredited psychological entity, to manifest itself in consciousness. In this connection, it is highly significant to note that as far as can be determined, almost all professed materialists of the uncritical type, and even most of those who are thinking and philosophizing skeptics about the existence of the supersensuous realm or state of conscious being, are to or have been city dwellers, usually so by birth and breeding. And even where we find materialists of either type dwelling in the country, we generally find them so completely under the hypnotic sway of city influences and mold of thought in matters of education and culture. I'm sorry, I can't finish. Oh, I got one page left. I'm crashing. I got a sugar crash. I think anyway. Can't handle it. I feel like shit, guys. Oh. Something haunting me. I don't know what it is. I feel real cold all of a sudden. Oh. We generally find them so completely under the hypnotic sway and city influences and mold of thought in matters of education and culture, and in matters touching religion, that they have lost all sympathetic and responsive contact with nature. Because unconsciously they have thus permitted conventionality and unnaturalness to insulate them from it. The Celtic peasant, who may be their tenant or neighbor, is if still uncorrupted by them, in direct contrast to unconventional or natural. is normally always responsive to psychical influences, as much so as an Australian Arunta or an American redman, who also, like him, are fortunate enough to have escaped being corrupted by what we egotistically, to distinguish ourselves from them, call civilization. If our Celtic peasant has psychical experiences, or if he sees an apparition which he calls one of the good people, that is to say, a fairy, it is useless to try to persuade him that he is under delusion. Unlike his materialistically minded lord, he would not attempt, nor even desire to make himself believe that what he has seen, he has not seen. He has not seen. What he has seen, he has not seen. Not only has he the will to believe, but he has the right to believe, because his belief is not a matter of being educated or in reasoning logically, nor a matter of faith and theology. It is a fact of his own individual experiences, as he will tell you. Such peasant seers have frequently argued with me to the effect that one does not have to be educated in order to see fairies. Unlike the natural mind of the uncorrupted Celt, Arunta, or American redman, which is ever open to unusual psychical impressions, the mind of the businessman in our great cities tends to be obsessed with business affairs, both during his waking, and during his dream states. The politicians with politics, similarly, the society's leader with society, and the unwholesome excitement felt day by day in the city is apt to be heightened at night through a satisfying and of the feeling which it morbidly creates for relaxation and change of stimuli. In the slums, humanity is divorced from nature under even worse conditions. In the slums, humanity is divorced from nature under even worse conditions and becomes wholly decadent. But in slum and in palace alike, there is continually a feverish nerve tension induced by unrest and worry. There is impure and smoke-impregnated air, a lack of sunshine, a substitution of artificial objects for natural objects, and in place of solitude, an eternal din of traffic. Instead of nature, men in cities, and paradoxically some conventionalized men in the country, have quote-unquote civilization and quote-unquote culture. Are city dwellers like these nature's unnatural children, who grind out their lives in an unceasing struggle for wealth and power and social position, and even for bread, fit to judge nature's natural children who believe in fairies? Are they right in not believing in an invisible world which they cannot conceive, which, if it exists, They, even though they, even though they be scientists, are through environment and temperament alike incapable of knowing? Or is the country dwelling, the sometimes quote unquote unpractical and quote unquote unsuccessful, the dreaming and quote unquote uncivilized peasant right? These questions ought to arouse in the minds of anthropologists the very serious reflection worldwide in its scope. At all events, and equally for the unbelievable, the unbeliever, and for the believer, the study of the fairy faith is of vast importance, historically, philosophically, religiously, and scientifically. In it lie the germs of much of our European religions and philosophies, customs, and institutions. And it is one of the chief keys to unlock the mysteries of Celtic mythology. We believe that a greater age is coming soon, when all the ancient mythologies will be carefully studied and interpreted, and when the mythology of the Celts will be held in very high esteem. But already an age has come when things purely Celtic have begun to be studied, and the close observer can see the awakening genius of the modern Celt manifesting in itself in the realm of scholarship, literature, and even of art throughout continental Europe, especially France and Germany, throughout Great Britain and Ireland, and throughout the new Celtic world of America, as far west as San Francisco, on the great calm ocean of the future facing Japan and China. In truth, the Celtic Empire is greater than it ever was before Caesar destroyed its political unity, and its citizens have not forgotten the ancient faith and of their ancestors in a world invisible. Woo! How about that one? Written W-Y-E-W. And there, my friends, is your introduction. Oh, I like it. Quite a crescendo, no? Did I get it recorded or not? I'm buzzing, buddies. Completely buzzing. I don't know what kind of drug has got me going, but god damn it, I feel fine. I'm gonna have to call it a quit though. Until next time. This will be Dispatcher of Illinois. The flatlands of Illinois. The great canvas of the Midwest. Until next time. And what is it? February 16th, 2020. 12:54. Almost midnight. You guys have yourself a good day or night or sunset. Night, people. Good night, my people.